everyone. Today is Saturday, April 5th, and today was working on reviewing German irregular verbs or strong verbs and kind of mixed ones that have the ablaut, like the vowel changes in the stems that go from kind of third person, present, singular, and the imperfect or the preterite form, and then also the past participle forms. Because I'm continuing to do some research for the English irregular verbs and to try to kind of teach them in groups. And there was another book that I've read before by Steven Pinker, and I found one page in there that was explaining kind of, at least for the English verbs, how like the default for regular verbs is the ed ending, but if something pops up in the memory of an irregular form, that will kind of take precedence. But if nothing really pops up, then the ed ending remains like the default. And there are situations in English where there might be a new meaning that is not based on like the irregular verb original meaning. So, for example, in baseball, if a ball is hit kind of out to the outfield, like it's flied out, not like flew out. But so in a way, like a fly ball, meaning that it wasn't like in the area of the baseball field. So this isn't like flew out, like a bird flew out of the nest or something, in that sense that it's flying, but in this case like flied out or something. So irregular verbs can take on these regular endings to designate like a different meaning. And there are situations where for example, with my children, if they haven't explicitly kind of learned in irregular form, they'll go ahead and apply a regular ending, and then my memory probably steps in and says, oh, no, that's irregular, we say this. And so there is a tendency where, like, from one generation to another, it is possible to kind of lose irregular verbs if they are starting to fall out of usage and become less frequent, especially if there are certain verbs that feel a bit archaic, that are no longer in kind of our daily routines and daily lifestyle. So those things fall out of usage, and then it becomes harder to remember those forms, and then people have those doubts of like, what is it? And this also even goes for adult native speakers who are using their native language on a daily basis and don't necessarily have some corruption from like a foreign language influence. So just in their daily life, certain verbs are not as frequent if they don't hear it, I don't know, on the radio, in the news, and movies and TV shows, or in conversation at work or at school. So, or with friends and neighbors and family. So it is possible to see certain words in a certain kind of outside of a bubble or inside of a bubble. So that is a normal process of the language. But I'm really curious to kind of trace these things back. I was already using ChatGPT to help me fill in some tables for old English, and even this kind of old Norse, or proto English, like trying to go back this Proto-Germanic forms as well. So looking at some of those forms and seeing how some of these verb forms became something else in German or in English, and it hasn't always been like an exact line, but there are groups and patterns. And what I could see in this book about the words and the rules is that, like, for the regular verbs, there's a rule, ed. Otherwise, there's an associative memory, and it's this kind of adding more groups to a certain kind of a concept and words that are kind of gravitating around that. Yet there are words that don't respect those groups, especially the words that have like a short word that ends with a T or a D. There are regular ones as well. So it in order to kind of what's the rule and what's an exception or what, so it's tricky to kind of want to make a one size fits all kind of explain everything. That's not my attempt. That's not my intention. But I just want to make these things accessible for my students, because some of the documents, some of the resources that I look at are very researched, heavily researched, with very technical linguistic terminology, and even for me with familiarity, it still is a bit inaccessible, and I don't want to give those materials directly to my students. So, and at the other end of the spectrum, some books that are very simplistic, they really don't kind of help the student. They kind of just hint that there are some things, and they just will give the list in alphabetical order and say, hey, you figured this out. So I want to find this midpoint where it's not overly explained and hard to understand, and not simplistic that it's just meaningless, but finding a middle ground where there are these patterns and you can kind of see the essence of what was going on as these languages have evolved, side by side, and sometimes with a direct influence. And also the curiosity of just kind of imagining that for a long time there weren't books, that people were not literate, writing things down, reading things. So they were using their ear to imitate what they heard from other speakers. And so it was influenced by sound. And there are certain sound patterns and groups. And so if your memory kind of associates a certain group of words, why not add another one to that group, as opposed to like trying to hold it in a separate list? And especially if you're not writing things down, there's probably a tendency for some of these verbs to just kind of go by association, and not really overthink it. And if you don't find those in groups, then kind of default to some regular rules that could exist in, for example, in the German or in the Old English and then Modern English. So it is normal that over time these rules feel less and less logical, and we feel more and more distance from those origins, points of origin. So it is possible that things start to fall apart away in a certain way. Yet, if you try to go back to some of those origin points, things can make some sense. So that's what I'm trying to figure out with these forms. And I also have some other students asking me about phrasal verbs, and I'm trying to look at these prefixes that are kind of inseparable, separable, for example, in German, and see how some of them have a specific meaning that is changing the base verb, and I can see how there are examples that have carried over into English. For example, with like the get and forget and stand and understand, that there is there is a meaning that is there with those prefixes or the suffixes and things. So I'm really curious to follow through with that. But yeah. Hola a todos. Hoy es sábado 5 de abril y hoy he estado pasando mucho tiempo revisando los verbos de alemán y porque también quiero hacer más búsquedas para los verbos irregulares en inglés y ver qué hay en común de la pronunciación y como etimología. Entonces tengo varios diccionarios de alemán francés, alemán español, alemán inglés, recursos de cómo aprender alemán y gramática intermedia con glosarios y índices con las listas de los verbos. Entonces he estado como haciendo una lista en la compu y logré hacer como casi 200 verbos, y cada uno de los diccionarios tiene unas listas en común y en los como listas más cortas, entonces vemos los verbos más útiles, y hay unos diccionarios más gruesos que tienen listas más completas. Entonces hay un como punto intermedio de ver como cuáles son los más frecuentes, y también quiero seguir haciendo mis búsquedas entre los puntos en común en inglés, porque muchos alumnos me están pidiendo ayuda con cómo entender la lógica de estos verbos. Entonces voy a seguir haciendo eso. Pero hoy fue un buen trabajo, un buen esfuerzo de hacer una compilación entre esos recursos. Bonjour tout le monde, aujourd'hui c'est le 5 avril et aujourd'hui j'ai fait beaucoup de recherches pour reviser les verbes irréguliers en allemand. Donc j'étais en train de prendre des ressources de plusieurs dictionnaires et des livres de grammaire pour avoir tout ce que je trouvais dans une seule liste. Après, j'ai envie de les regrouper par son et prononciation, et pouvoir aussi faire une liaison entre les verbes irréguliers en anglais qui ont des cognates. Donc j'ai envie de voir si je peux arriver à grouper et voir la logique. Donc voilà. Hallo an alle, heute ist der 5. April und heute lerne ich Verben auf Deutsch und auf Englisch. Ich habe viele Bücher, Wörterbücher und Grammatik. Und ich denke, dass es gibt vielleicht 200 Verben, das ich habe gefunden. Und einige Studenten haben mir gefragt, wie können sie die Verben zu lernen und ich möchte weiterhalten, verstehen diesen Verben und die Gruppen für zwischen Deutsch und Englisch. Und ja, das ist alles für heute. Ciao a tutti, oggi è il 5 aprile e oggi ho passato tempo per studiare i verbi in tedesco perché ci sono domande quando voglio parlare in tedesco e ci sono studenti che imparano inglese con me e voglio aiutare a capire i verbi in inglese con i verbi in tedesco. E ho utilizzato 6 libri come dizionario e grammatica e voglio continuare. Questo è tutto per oggi. Всем привет, сегодня 5 апреля и сегодня утром, сегодня я выучил глаголы на немецком, и у меня есть книга и словарь, словари, и я смог написать на лист, и надеюсь, что это может помогать студентам, также, которые изучают английский язык со мной. И также, как я говорю по-немецки, я хочу понимать лучше эти глаголы и так. Это все на сегодня. Большое спасибо. Пока.